What's up, YouTubers? So, no budget build today. We're now working on the Camaro. We've got my Avi up on the lift, my 2004 Chevy Avalanche, my daily driver. With all the projects around here, she tends to get neglected a little bit. And with our fantastic New York roads, huge amounts of sarcasm. I don't want to get into politics, but let's just say they don't spend their money wisely. The potholes are horrible this year. Well, my old girl has taken quite the beating. The boots on the CV shaft on the passenger side are ripped and spraying grease everywhere, and the CV shaft on the driver's side is making all kinds of noise. And then I got ABS just like randomly kicking on dry roads and stuff, so we got a wheel bearing on its way out. Got to take it apart for CV shafts, might as well replace the wheel bearings. So, 2 wheel bearings, 2 CV shafts. I'll just walk you through one side of it. You don't need to see it all. It's the same thing on the other side. So I'm just going to walk you through it quick on how to replace your CV shaft and wheel bearing on these trucks. The Silverados are the same. The only thing different between the Avalanche and the Silverados is the back of the truck. The rear suspension is different. It's more like a Tahoe or a Suburban, where the front is exactly the same as a Silverado. So I actually did wheel bearing on a Silverado last weekend. I probably should have taped that for you, but this is a Southern truck, so it shouldn't be too bad. Overall, it's really not a hard job if you have the right tools. You're going to need a torque wrench. If you don't have one, borrow one from a buddy or rent one from your local auto parts store. And you need that for the CV shaft nut out at the end where the wheel bearing is. And you need it because there's a torque spec for that wheel bearing, and if you go too tight or too loose, your wheel bearing is not going to last. So I believe the torque spec is like 165 or something like that, but I'll look it up and I will confirm when I go to torque it. Another thing you need is a 36mm socket for that axle nut. That's a big one. Most people don't have it. I borrowed one from my uncle. The only one I could find at Tractor Supply was 1 7/16. That's what I'm going to try to use today, but if that doesn't work, I will have to run and grab a 36mm from my uncle's house. It's good to have family nearby with good tools. And other than that, it's just your basic hand tools. I have impact guns, so I'm going to make it look easy. There we go. Okay, so obviously the first step is to get the wheel and tire off. And then you pull the caliper bracket off. You can pull the whole thing off in one piece. Caliper, you don't got to take these out. If you notice, this is an aftermarket caliper. It's got a hex bolt. Your factory style caliper will have a T55 Torx, like that one. I had to put a caliper on this last time I did a brake job because it was getting stuck. But anyways, after you pull the caliper bracket and everything off, I like to zip tie them up to the control arm. Keep them from falling on your head or on your arm or whatever, just falling and getting in your way while you're working. So they're up, they're out of the way, they're zip tied. You don't got to worry about the hoses and stuff. Just everything's up out of the way. Then you can pull the rotor off, which here in New York tends to be fun usually. I had to use a mallet because it gets rusty in here and doesn't want to come off. Now this truck's from North Carolina, right? It's been in New York for 2 years. That's it. We've been here 2 years. Look at all the corrosion from the salt. You can see the frame starting to rust a little bit. 2 years in New York. So, there's the big ass nut I was talking about that you gotta have a big socket for. And we have a 1 7/16 here, which will work. It's not really the right socket, but it will take it off. Set this down. I gotta hold that thing from spinning. Just like that. Big ass washer behind it. Alright. So, the nut's off. Now this part here will actually just push in. See how it's loose? So the next step is to go up in here and unbolt all these bolts here. So after you get these all unbolted, you actually have to unbolt the top of the sway bar to give yourself some clearance in here, and then you can actually drop that down and slide it right out. Alright, so I'm going to pull this these axle bolts out. They're 15 millimeter, and I got my little 3/8 impact here. This is DeWalt 20 volt. I bought the half inch 3/8 kit. Comes with a little light. A guy had them on eBay for $418 for the kit, which is a smoking deal. They're like 540 something normally. These things are lifesavers, man. They're fantastic. Alright, now my truck has a +2, +3 lift in it, so I'm going to see if I can fish this out of here without pulling the sway bar. On a stock truck, you definitely have to pull the sway bar. No, I definitely got to do the sway bar. Alright. So there you go. There's a little comedy for you. Alright, so the sway bar end links are see if they're 14 millimeter. There's not a nut on the top like an old style vehicle. The top, hopefully we don't break it off. The bushing, the washer piece that captures the rubber part is actually threaded. There are flats on it, but they're pretty hard to get to. It's real thin. I usually just use a vice grip. Seems to work just fine. And there you go, lovely New York State rust. It's frozen. So there's the piece I was talking about that's threaded. I'm gonna do the other side so we can swing this bar up out of the way. There we go. There's that one. Same idea. I can't remember if sway bar extensions were part of my lift kit or not. But I can tell you that bushing right there does not look very good. Looking pretty beat up. Might have to do end links here at some point. But right now, that's not what we're worried about. So now, as you can see here, you can push this up out of the way, knock all those parts out that side. Which means you should be able to move this piece, and it will give you enough room. Took my gloves off, that was a mistake. To get this out of here. Just like that. Next is the bearing. So there's 3 bolts in the back of the bearing here. So there's one up top there. They are 15 millimeter. After you get those bolts out, you pretty much beat the shit out of it with a block of wood or a pipe or something. You can stick in through the back here and swing a hammer in here, and you hit it and you blast it out of there. Here in New York, things get rusty, and a lot of times it requires heat to get it out. But we're going to see how it goes being this truck with Southern. You got to remember to unhook all your ABS stuff before you blast that thing out of there. You don't want to rip any wires out. There we go. Alright, so because I live in New York, I'm going straight for the heat. I'm not even going to bother trying to not use heat, because it's just not going to come out. So, anytime you're using heat on anything like this, I mean, acetylene is obviously the way to go. I got this little plumber's torch that I use, and I tend to get away with it usually. We'll see how I make out today. You gotta watch out for rubber and plastic. I know that sounds like common sense, but you'd be surprised. There's a rubber boot here, there's one up there on your ball joint, there's one down there on your ball joint. Your ABS stuff, that doesn't really matter because it comes with the new bearing. So if that catches on fire, who gives a shit? So I'm going to heat this thing up and then we're going to beat the crap out of it. Alright, so as you can see, there's quite a bit of rust and stuff in here. So if you live somewhere where there's rust, you have to clean this surface before you put the new bearing in. Sandpaper, some Scotch-Brite, get in there and clean that up good. And then I like to actually spray a little penetrating oil on it before I put the bearing in there. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't do anything, but I'd like to think it helps keep some of the water out of there in the future. Maybe it won't rust quite as bad. You could probably even spread some Never Seas in there if you wanted to before you pressed it in there. And then when you actually put the new one on, you push it in as far as you can. It should go pretty much all the way in. And then you just cross pattern when you tighten the bolts. So tighten this one a little, that one a little, that one a little, back and forth. Working around till you get it back up flush and tight. And that's where we are headed to next after I clean this up. Alright, so got this all cleaned up, sanded. I actually put a little quick swath of grease in there with my finger. Real thin, high temperature grease. Hopefully if I ever have to take this thing apart again, it comes apart without too much of a fight. Now let's put this in. We got some Never Seas on the bolts. I repeat, Never Seas on the bolts, because if you ever want to take this thing apart again, it's a good idea. So, now usually when it comes to wheel bearings, I tend to stick to a bearing company like SKF or Timken, but my cousin last week when I did his, he bought Moog wheel bearings, and they actually look really nice, fairly well built. They got a good price on them, so that's what I bought. I bought the Moogs, and we're going to see what happens. They actually go in quite nice, right up to the face without a fight. It's clean. Oh, I forgot the dust shield. Alright, so these axles are actually CarQuest brand. They were the only choice. It was the only thing Advanced Auto Parts had in stock. Comes with a new nut and washer, which is nice, but looks like a good unit. It's the only thing I had a choice of, so it is what it is, I guess. I am going to put a little bit of grease on the spline before I press it in, just so I don't have to fight it. All the clamps and everything on it from move, so you can literally just stick it right back where the old one was. It's nice. See how this goes. Just like that. Back in. Looking mint. Plug it back in. You can see the flange face is nice and flat. Flush all the way around. Now I gotta put the axle in. Never sees everything, so you can get it apart next time. I mean, hopefully you never have to take it apart again, but if you plan on keeping a vehicle for a while, or it's a customer's vehicle that you're going to plan on working on more, or if you're hard on equipment, you break stuff, some of us are, then you need to invest about all this stuff. Use it on everything. Some people will tell you not to use it on certain things, like lug nuts. I've heard that lots of times, don't put it on lug nuts. Excuse me. But in many a vehicle I've taken apart that weren't mine, I found it on the lug nuts, so their wheels didn't fall off. But I don't use it on lug nuts. You don't really want to watch me bolt this up, so I'm going to... Okay, so I just hand tightened this nut here, well, with a ratchet, but I didn't crank down on it. After I put it all back together, get the brakes, everything back on it, and I set it down on the floor, put the wheel back on, take the center cap off the wheel before I put it on. Then when the wheel's on the ground, you won't have to fight this thing turning while you're trying to torque it. So once the wheel's on the ground, you can put the torque wrench on it and just click and torque it down. I haven't actually looked up the spec yet, but another thing I noticed about this move bearing was that it's actually got a jack bolt hole in it. So you can put a bolt in the back of it, screw it in, and push the rotor off when the rotor gets stuck on there. That is genius engineering. That is what they should have thought of on this spindle. They should have put jack bolt holes in the back of it so you can run a bolt in and push that bearing out instead of having to beat the crap out of it with a hammer. So if any GM engineers are watching this, write that down. Alright, so because we took the caliper and bracket all off in one piece, it makes it kind of heavy and awkward to put back on. For that, just run a lug nut on, hand tight, keep this rotor from flopping all over the place, and it makes it quite a bit easier. Alright, so the torque spec is actually 177 foot-pounds. As you can see, I already pulled the center cap off of here. The nut's right there. Got this set to 177 foot-pounds. These wheels are a little bit wide. Put that in there. Your stock wheels, you can get this on here without fighting it. I'm actually going to have to use an extension, unfortunately, which hurts your torque. Extensions take away from your torque rating, but I kind of don't have a choice on this one. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it click, but it will click when it's tight. 177 is a lot. There you go. It clicked. I don't know if you heard it, but that's it. Job is done. Put the center cap back on and take it for a ride, see how it makes out. I know we didn't do anything fun today, but as usual, keep it creative and happy building.